Welcome back everyone to our studies in AQA A-Level Sociology. This lesson is continuing our discussion of crime and deviance, and we're going to think about the idea of globalization and crime as it pertains to contemporary society. Now specifically, we're going to be examining the idea of globalization and crime in contemporary society with reference to things like transnational organized crime, growing criminal organizations, the idea of global capitalism, and the crimes of the powerful. Now, beginning first then, we would generally be content in defining globalism or globalization as the increasing interconnectedness and interdependence of nations, of economies, and of cultures. Essentially, the process by which the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller because it's easier to interact with everybody around it. This is a process that is driven by advancements in communication, technology, and transportation, leading to a more globalized world where goods, services, information, and people can all move across borders with greater and greater ease. And ultimately, the idea of globalization has had a profound impact specifically on numerous different things, including global economies, but also on crime and deviance. It has created new forms of criminality and new forms of criminal organization. Let's have a look in more detail then at what these may look like. The idea of transnational organized crime, or TOCs, refers to criminal activities that span across multiple countries and that involve networks of criminals that will operate on a global scale. Now, transnational organized crimes are often committed by highly structured criminal organizations and will often exist and operate outside of the jurisdiction of any single state. And that is beneficial for these organizations because if they exist outside of the jurisdiction of an individual state, then the task of tackling and enforcing law against the organization as a whole becomes very, very difficult. We can see that there are key features associated with transnational organized crime. One of these includes the idea of there being cross-border activities. The idea of a transnational organized crime, by the name transnational, implies that activities will occur in more than one country. These activities might include, but are not limited to, drug trafficking, human trafficking, arms smuggling, money laundering, and crimes of cyber natures. Criminal organizations might take advantage of the weaknesses or the corruption that is imbued in different legal systems as a way to elicit goods and to move people around in terms of crossing borders. Criminal organizations are carried out by these international networks, sometimes operated as syndicates. Examples of this include things like the Mexican drug cartels, the Sinaloa cartel, for example, or things like Italian mafia groups like Cosa Nostra. These all have significant global presence and would be described as the kind of global networks that are illustrative of transnational organizations. These groups will often exploit global markets to make vast profits. So, drug trafficking, for example, remains to this day to be one of the most lucrative forms of crime. Now, if you want to look at some of the drug trafficking crimes and criminal activities that took place in the sort of 1980s and the 1990s, have a look at the regime in Colombia with people like Pablo Escobar. Just thinking about the sheer scale of the amount of money that this drug regime actually was able to create for individuals like Pablo Escobar and this kind of drug trafficking system. And then finally, you can't really have transnational organizations that are criminal organizations without often linking this to some kind of state corruption. Because criminal organizations will often bribe law enforcement, political leaders, and other government officials in order to ensure that there is smooth operation across borders. This has an added effect, a detrimental effect of increasing political instability in those countries, undermining the rule of law, and also leading to state fragility. In terms of the types of organized crime, I've already mentioned already, we can see that major drug cartels will operate transnationally and will often produce and smuggle illicit drugs such as cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines from countries like Colombia, Mexico, and Afghanistan, in fact, and then distribute those to global markets in North Africa, in Europe, and in Asia. Human trafficking and the globalized human trafficking organizations is a major impact and a major force for negativity in the world. Global organized groups will engage in human trafficking for sexual or exploitation, forced labor, or even the organ trade, organ harvesting. This has grown as a transnational crime, with traffickers exploiting migrant workers and vulnerable populations. Another growing issue in relation to the types of organised crimes includes things like the smuggling of illegal weapons across borders. Criminal groups, and often even state actors, may engage in illicit and illegal arms trade. This is to try and exacerbate things like terrorism, armed conflict, or violence in various different parts of the world. Global criminal organizations, then, are highly organized and often involve sophisticated hierarchical structures. These organizations will, again, just like transnational organizations, operate across multiple countries and are involved in a variety of illegal activities. They will often exploit the globalization of trade, capital flows, and communications in order to maximize their profits. We have things like syndicate structures that are organized and affiliated with groups or cells that work together in a global network. We've already mentioned things like the mafias and groups in places like Mexico, but you also have groups in the Russian Federation, in Japan, and a number of Latin American cartels as well. The criminal organizations will often have operations that stretch across different continents. So various different examples of this, but the Italian mafia might be one such example of a powerful syndicate. Not as powerful as it used to be, of course, as it's sort of now steeped more into the realms and the categories of fiction. They're more popular in fiction than they are in the real world. But the often motive for the creation of global organizations of this kind is to profit from illegal markets, so drug smuggling, human trafficking, arms trades, engaging in money laundering to disguise the origins of illicit funds. And these organizations will often use violence and coercive control to maintain the ability to actually operate these illicit operations to protect their own interests. Another feature of crime and deviance that is often associated with global capitalism, and so therefore would be associated with the growth of globalization, is the idea of global capitalism and the idea of the crimes of the powerful. So global capitalism, of course, refers to the idea of the global integration of markets and businesses. So things like multinational corporations, financial institutions, and wealthy elites operating across different borders. And while global capitalism can promote economic growth and technological development, it also creates criminal opportunities for the powerful to exploit resources and to exploit people. Corporate crimes occur when powerful companies will break their laws or break laws to maximize profits. These might include violating environmental protections, product safety negligence, tax evasion, or just very simply accounting fraud. In a globalized economy, multinational corporations can operate in countries with very weak regulations and very weak levels of enforcement, and this enables them to therefore bypass local laws. The globalization of finance has also facilitated the rise of what are described as financial crimes, so insider trading, tax evasion, money laundering. This is the kind of criminal activity that wealthy elites or powerful corporations might engage in to evade taxes, to illegally profit from their positions. For example, a multinational corporation may engage in something known as transfer pricing, which is shifting profits to low-tax jurisdictions in order to avoid for essentially the ability to not be taxed, to lower your tax burden, or tax avoidance schemes to just reduce their tax burdens in wealthier countries. Global capitalism may also lead to the exploitation of labor in developing countries. Large corporations will set up operations in countries with low wages and poor labor laws, as well as minimal environmental regulations, in order to be able to have greater profit at the expense of workers' rights and workers' safety. And the crimes of the powerful often include the crimes that are of an environmental nature. So corporations in industries like mining, oil, and agriculture may often engage in environmental degradation and pollution and violate environmental laws for profit. This has a negative effect, not really on the powerful, on the wealthy in society, but on those who are least wealthy in society, on the developing world, that will not be better off as the result of these kinds of environmental crimes. The idea of ecocide has been one that has been touted in international law circles for many years. The idea of making the intentional destruction of the environment an international crime, and it would be up there with things like the crime of genocide or the crime of war crimes or the crime of aggression. More on those crimes in a future video when we talk about crimes of states. But this is one of those things that has seen quite a lot of support among the world. The idea of criminalizing at an international level and putting ecocide alongside some of those other acts of criminal destruction. So what kind of examples can we think of when looking at the crimes of the powerful? Well, I've got here three, and these are three that exist in three basically different areas of capital crimes. You have firstly the 2001 Enron scandal. This is the collapse of the Enron Corporation due to fraudulent accounting practices, insider trading, as well as the misrepresentation of financial status. This is the classic example that you can refer to of corporate crime at the highest level. An example of environmental crime, or potentially environmental crime, can be seen in the BP oil spill in 2010. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico was the result of not only negligence, but also by cost-cutting from British Petroleum, from BP. The environmental impact was global. The company faced quite minimal penalties due to its political influence and financial resources. That is an example of an environmental crime. An example of the idea of tax evasion and the crimes of wealthy elites can be seen in 2016 with the Panama Papers. This was a leak that revealed how multinational corporations and wealthy elites, including some politicians in the UK, for example, David Cameron, I believe, was implicated in this scandal, how these wealthy elites would use offshore tax havens to evade taxes and to conceal illegal financial activities. And so ultimately then, we can see that globalization of crime is an increasingly complex phenomenon. The rise of transnational organized crimes, as well as the proliferation of global criminal organizations, and the role of global capitalism in facilitating these crimes of the powerful, highlight the significant challenges that are faced by law enforcement, as well as by international institutions in combating crime in contemporary society.